Walk down Auburn Avenue in Atlanta on a summer evening in 1948, and your senses would have been full before you reached the end of the block, ragtime spilling out of the top hat, the smell of fried chicken drifting from Ma Sutton's, men in good suits coming out of the bank, women in hats stepping out of the beauty parlors, the constant low hum of 1,000 conversations on a crowded sidewalk, black doctors and black lawyers and black bankers all working within a few hundred yards of one another, a newspaper office, an insurance company headquarters founded by a man born into slavery, now worth more money than almost any black-owned business in America, churches on nearly every corner. This was a mile and a half of street where, for a few remarkable decades, black America was not waiting to be let in anywhere, because it had built its own everything, right here, and built it better than most of the country thought was possible. In 1956, a national magazine looked at this street and gave it a title. Fortune magazine called Auburn Avenue the richest Negro street in the world. Now stand on that same avenue today. Walk to the heart of it, and at a certain point the sky disappears over your head because a 10-lane freeway roars across the street on a concrete bridge, and the noise of the traffic drowns out whatever you were going to say. Many of the grand buildings are boarded up or gone. For decades, people called this one of the most endangered historic places in America. The richest Negro street in the world became a street that tour buses that you drive past on the way to a memorial. So how does that happen? How does the richest black street on earth become a monument to its own disappearance? Here's the part nobody expects. It was not only racism that killed Sweet Auburn. In the cruelest twist in this whole story, the street was destroyed in large part by its own greatest victory. The avenue that birthed the CHUZ, the movement to end segregation, was emptied out by the end of segregation. To understand how a triumph can also be a death sentence, you have to start with how the street was born, and with a name given in love that turned out to be a prophecy nobody read closely enough. The street wasn't always called Auburn. It was originally Wheat Street. And the reason it changed is the first bitter irony in a story full of them. In 1893, white residents petitioned the city to rename it because they thought Auburn Avenue sounded more refined, more cosmopolitan than Wheat Street. So the name itself was handed down by white Atlantans who wanted it to sound classier. They could not have imagined what black Atlanta would do with it. What pushed black business onto Auburn was violence. In 1906, Atlanta erupted in a race riot, white mobs attacking black residents and black-owned businesses across the city for days. In the aftermath, black entrepreneurs made a hard, clear-eyed decision. They pulled back from the integrated downtown districts where they were exposed, and they concentrated their businesses in the places they could defend and rely on each other, around the black colleges on the west side and here on Auburn Avenue, just east of downtown. Jim Crow law did the rest, hemming black Atlanta into a narrow corridor and giving it no choice but to build a world of its own inside the lines that had been drawn around it, and build it they did. The man at the center of it had been born into slavery in Walton County, Georgia. His name was Alonzo Herndon. He started with a barber shop on Peachtree Street, the white commercial spine of Atlanta, and he ran it so well that he turned a barber's earnings into a fortune. In 1905, he founded the Atlanta Life Insurance Company. Within 5 years, it had more than 40 branch offices. It would grow into the second largest black-owned insurance company in the entire country. And Alonzo Herndon, who had been born a slave, became the first black millionaire in the city of Atlanta. Herndon was one leg of what the historian Gary Pomerantz called Atlanta's three-legged stool of black finance. The second was Standard Life, another black insurance company. The third was Citizens Trust Bank, and the bank mattered most of all because it did the one thing that breaks the cycle. It lent money to black homeowners, and black entrepreneurs that the white banks downtown would not touch. On most American streets in that era, a black man with a good business idea and no collateral hit a wall. On Auburn Avenue, he could walk into a bank owned by people who look like him and walk out with a loan. That is the engine. That is how a street gets rich. Money earned on the avenue was lent out on the avenue and built more business on the avenue. The proof was everywhere you looked. Atlanta's first black-owned office building, the Rucker Building, went up in 1904, put there by Henry Rucker, another man born a slave. In 1928, the Atlanta Daily World was founded right here, the first black-owned daily newspaper in America, and it is still publishing today, the longest-running African-American newspaper in the country. Doctors, dentists, drugstores, tailors, photographers, funeral homes, restaurants. By the 1940s, walking Auburn Avenue meant passing a complete, self-contained black economy, dense and humming, on a single mile-and-a-half stretch of street that the rest of America had tried to wall off and instead had only concentrated into something formidable. It had a soundtrack, too. There was a club that opened in 1938 called the Top Hat, later renamed the Royal Peacock, and it became one of the great stages of black music in the South. B.B. King played there. Gladys Knight, Atlanta's own, played there. Aretha Franklin, the Four Tops, the Tams. And anchoring the whole avenue on nearly every block were the churches, Big Bethel AME, Wheat Street Baptist, and Ebenezer Baptist, where a father and a grandfather both preached from the same pulpit. Which brings us to a two-story house at 501 Auburn Avenue, and to a boy who was born in an upstairs bedroom there in January of 1929. We'll come back to who he was, but you already feel it coming, because his church was Ebenezer. 3 blocks from his front door, and the street he grew up on was already the political heart of black Atlanta. The man they called the mayor of Auburn Avenue, a civic leader named John Wesley Dobbs, ran voter registration drives out of this neighborhood that pushed the number of registered black voters in Atlanta from under 2,000 to more than 20,000, building a political force where there had been none. The NAACP organized here. Later, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference would headquarter here. In 1948, when the Atlanta Police Department was finally pressured into hiring its first 8 black officers, every single one of them was assigned to patrol Auburn Avenue, because that was the one place in the city where black officers were permitted to work. The avenue was not just rich, it was the place where black Atlanta organized to change the country. And it worked. That is the whole tragedy in 3 words. It worked. Because here is what happens when the movement that an avenue like this gives birth to actually wins. Everything that made sweet Auburn rich was built on a foundation of forced separation. Black Atlantans banked on Auburn because no white bank would have them. They shopped on Auburn because they were not welcome on Peachtree. They stayed in the black hotels on Auburn because no other hotel would rent them a room. The wealth of the street was a direct product of the wall around it. So when the movement led by that boy from 501 Auburn Avenue finally brought the wall down, when segregation was struck from the law and black Americans could at last bank and shop and eat and sleep anywhere they chose, they did exactly what anyone would do. They chose. The customers spread out across the whole city. The business owners, now free to set up anywhere, follow the money to the growing west side and the suburbs. The captive market that had made Auburn Avenue the richest Negro street in the world was set free, and a free market does not stay captive on 1 mile of street. The very victory the avenue had fought for pulled the economic ground out from under it. The New Georgia Encyclopedia put it plainly. Auburn's civic activism led to its undoing. Pomerantz called it a necessary, though regrettable, price for freedom. And while integration was draining the avenue from the inside, the government came to cut it from the outside. The Housing Act of 1949 handed cities the money and the power of eminent domain to clear neighborhoods in the name of renewal. The Federal Highway Act of 1956 launched the interstate system, and across the country, those highways were routed again and again, straight through black neighborhoods. Atlanta was no exception. The downtown connector, Interstate 75 and 85, merged into one massive expressway through the center of the city, was built directly across Auburn Avenue, slicing the street in two. The richest Negro street in the world was severed by a wall of concrete and traffic, the east end cut off from the west, the continuous mile-and-a-half of black commerce broken into pieces, bled from within by its own success, and split down the middle by the state. Few streets in America were ever hit from both directions at once like that. What followed was a long, slow emptying. Storefronts went dark, buildings fell into disrepair. The avenue that had pulsed every summer evening became, in Pomerantz's words, a decaying memorial to a bygone era. And the saddest revitalization attempt of all came in the 1970s, when Atlanta elected its first black mayor, a man named Maynard Jackson, who happened to be the grandson of John Wesley Dobbs, the very man who had loved the street enough to give it its name. Even Dobbs's own grandson, running the whole city, could not bring sweet Auburn back. The decline was too deep, the forces too large. In 1976, Auburn Avenue was designated a National Historic Landmark, which is its own kind of heartbreak, because that designation is the honor a place receives when it has stopped being alive and started being history. They preserve what they could not save. Now that name, the one given in love. We need to finish what we started with it because it is the most haunting thing in this entire story. John Wesley Dobbs did not invent the words "Sweet Auburn." He took them from a poem, a famous one, written in 1770 by Oliver Goldsmith, called "The Deserted Village." Dobbs loved the poem's opening line, and he gave its first two words to the street he loved, "Sweet Auburn." But "The Deserted Village" is not a poem about prosperity. It is an elegy. It is a lament for a thriving, beautiful village whose people are driven out, whose houses fall empty, whose life is hollowed away until nothing is left but the memory of what used to be there. Its opening line is the one Dobbs borrowed. "Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain." Its subject is that village's destruction. The man who named the richest black street in the world named it, without anyone quite hearing the warning. After a poem about a flourishing place that vanishes. And then it did. Stand there today under the roar of the freeway, in front of the restored facades, and the boarded windows and the historical markers, and the street sign overhead still says it. The same two words Dobbs gave it, the same two words Goldsmith wrote 250 years ago. Sweet Auburn, loveliest village of the plain, the richest Negro street in the world, a place that proved black America could build anything, and then was emptied by the freedom it had fought so hard to win.